A young man who studied law in Williamsburg wrote that its architecture was in the worst style I ever saw, and said of Virginia in general that the genius of architecture has cast its maledictions over this land. This was Thomas Jefferson, and he would become the third president of the United States. But he was an architect before the Revolution. His father gave him a classical education, a political background, and thousands of acres of rural Virginia. By 1767, he was designing himself a house on a hill deep in the Virginian countryside near Charlottesville. He called it Monticello. He was to work on it, tinker with it, for the best part of 40 years. Monticello is pervaded with enormous aesthetic ambition. It was also this great amateur's spiritual centre, his hearth, and his refuge from the painful stress of political life.
If I had to pick one person from all the dead Americans that I wish I could talk to, that man would be Thomas Jefferson, and the reason is the overwhelmingly attractive cast of his mind. He was one of those rare people who want to build everything up from first principles and do it without a trace of fanaticism or self-pity or cant. He was the living proof of William Blake's dictum that energy is eternal delight. He was revolutionary, statesman, diplomat, president, constitutionalist, educator, farmer, botanist, and the founder of American architecture. Reading him, you feel his enthusiasm and curiosity on your face like sunburn. He lived far beyond his means and was constantly in debt from the huge sums that he spent building and furnishing Monticello. And under the surface of the 18th century Whig reasonableness, there is something immoderate and crazy about Jefferson, and very important from my point of view, he was the patron saint of all do-it-yourselfers, a fact to which Monticello bears witness.
He was always looking for details of convenience. The portholes in the wall up there above his bed are there to ventilate his winter wardrobe. He designed a machine to make copies of his letters, and he wrote about 18,000 of them over his lifetime. He designed a clock to record the days of the week as well as the time of day. Cannonball weights moved down the walls past the day markers. Unfortunately, the hall of Monticello wasn't high enough, so he had to cut a hole in the floor and put the rest of the days in the cellar. Jefferson's masterpiece is his University of Virginia in Charlottesville. He saw that education was the key to the life of the new republic. He believed in what he called natural aristocracy, elites of talent and virtue, not of birth and privilege, which education could create from the ranks of ordinary Americans.
It was dedicated, he said, to the illimitable freedom of the human mind. It would be a pure expression of the Enlightenment without any input from religion. For Jefferson was a secular humanist through and through. How today's religious right would have disliked him, and how very little he would have thought of them.
The campus, which Jefferson called his academical village, is built around a lawn open at one end, so that, in a symbolic sense, knowledge and wisdom could radiate down and out into the American landscape. It is made of pavilions, set on increasing spaces as they recede from the eye, like a Palladian stage set. Each pavilion has classrooms at ground level and professors' quarters above. Between them are the students' dorms. Each of the 10 pavilions is built in a variant on the classical styles of architecture: Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and so on. The pavilions, said Jefferson, are cubic architecture, but the climax of the project, the rotunda, begun in 1823, he called spherical. It was based on the Pantheon in Rome. Within is the library, the round cranium of the university, literally its brain. Light floods it from the round skylight above, representing the power of nature. The books radiate the power of reason. Originally, Jefferson wanted to take this metaphor further by painting the dome sky blue and having gilt planets and stars moved across it by a sky clock. Even without that, it's a pristine space, a precinct of intellectual light, clarity and harmony. To me, this is the most beautiful room in America. Once you've seen it, you understand why Jefferson wanted to be remembered not as President of the United States, but as the author of the Declaration of Independence, the founder of religious liberty in Virginia, and the designer of this university. Even after a century of glass and steel, when we think of public buildings, we still think of columns and porticos. The very first temple-form political building in America, or indeed the modern world, was the new State House in Richmond, Virginia, designed by Jefferson in 1785. Jefferson was totally enraptured by an ancient Roman temple he visited in Nîmes, the Maison Carrée, or Square House. "Here I am, madame," he wrote to a friend in Paris, "gazing whole hours at the Maison Carrée like a lover at his mistress." He had a stucco model made of it and shipped it back to Richmond, and he bullied the legislature into accepting it as the basis of the new design.
At the core of the State House, where the statue of the god would have gone in a real Roman temple, there is a figure of George Washington. It was commissioned in 1788 from the French sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon, and he gave America its first really good public sculpture, a superb display of neoclassical style and intelligence. Insofar as a single figure can, this expresses an idea about democracy. It shows the statesman as citizen, not a king, not a god, but first among equals.
Jefferson specified that the size should be precisely that of a man. Anything bigger would be pretentious. So we don't see Washington as Victoria's general. He's a new Cincinnatus, the Roman hero who was called from civilian life to lead the army and returned to his farm after victory. He leans on a bundle of rods, the Roman fasces, each rod a state, their union connoting strength. His sword is sheathed. And then there's the plough, the symbol of agrarian virtue and the planting of a new political order. Houdon's final touch, a marvellous one I think, is Washington's missing button. It lets you know that he's not a stickler for protocol. Democracy in dress.